U.S. Steel was America's first billion-dollar company in 1901. Accounting for inflation, its formation was worth $51.4 billion. That made it larger than the national debt and 3 times larger than the federal budget. But 100 years later, and it's not even on the Fortune 500 list. In fact, U.S. Steel may not be American for much longer. If Nippon Steel gets its way, the symbol of American engineering will become Japanese for just $14 billion. That's a yard sale discount for a world-leading steel producer who erected the San Francisco Bay Bridge, part of NASA's Kennedy Space Station, and even the home of the United Nations in New York. At one point, it cornered 67% of the booming steel business. But flash forward to now, and domestic consumption has been reduced to 8%. So how did the biggest player in America's Industrial Revolution fall from grace? Were they outpaced by new competitors? Were they outpaced by tech? Or did the guys at the top simply fall asleep at the wheel? It starts at the dawn of the 20th century. It had become clear that the Industrial Revolution had a lot more gas left in the tank. So, JP Morgan and Charles Schwab decided to take advantage of this opportunity by teaming up. The two heavy-hitting investors had set their sights on a formidable company set up by Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie is often cited as leading the expansion of the American steel industry because of his technological innovations and business strategy. Though born in Scotland, his family immigrated to the United States when they hit tough times. They settled in Pittsburgh, which would eventually become the home of the U.S. steel industry, and the address of U.S. Steel's headquarters. But before then, young Carnegie had gotten acquainted with steel when he worked for Pennsylvania Railroad. Working as a telegraph operator was vital for his later success. Carnegie learned everything he could about management and cost control. In a business as big as railroads, success depended on moving big things efficiently. When he cut it out on his own to become an industrialist, his innovations put him on the map. Take the Bessemer converter. It was a way to improve impurities cheaply. By investing in the invention early on, Carnegie was able to streamline his operations more than his competitors. Soon, his output was being used to create the railroads for the very train companies he used to work for. But it was the vertical integration of his company which helped him grow enough to buy out competitors. It also helped that he was in cahoots with the high flyers of the railroad business to keep costs down. But don't worry about that. What's important is how these strategic moves got the attention of the biggest money men on the planet. When JP Morgan and Charles Schwab came knocking, Carnegie had found his ticket to retirement. They had observed how efficiently Carnegie made profit, and figured that if they could overhaul the entire industry, then they could transform steel mills into gold mines. Charles Schwab got to work hashing out the secret deal. When Carnegie signed the dotted line, his enterprise landed him $480 million, the largest deal in American history at the time. Adjusting for inflation, Carnegie's turn-of-the-century payday is closer to $17.74 billion. Once Morgan and Schwab had the business in their possession, they quickly combined it with their holdings in rival companies. One was Federal Steel Company, founded by Elbert Henry Gary. He's the 4th member of this story. Think of him like the final member of the Fantastic Four of U.S. Steel. Before getting into metal, he practiced law for 25 years. In fact, he only got interested in steel when he was a judge presiding over a case. The manufacturing and economics of it all intrigued him. So, he swapped his law degree for furnaces. He climbed the corporate ladder, and after a few mergers and acquisitions, became the head of Federal Steel. So when Schwab pitched him the idea of merging the company he and Morgan had just bought from Carnegie, it was a no-brainer. The two businesses merged, and then the quartet snapped up a few more companies. They merged with Henry Moore's National Steel Company, National Tube Works, American Steel and Wire, American Sheet Steel, American Steel Hoop, American Tin Plate, American Bridge, and everyone's favorite consolidated iron mines company, Lake Superior Consolidated Iron Mines. By combining these powers, U.S. Steel was forged. An HQ was promptly set up in the Empire State Building, and Schwab became the corporation's first president. He had been the one to suggest the merger to Gary to begin with, so it only makes sense that he called dibs on the fancy job title. As for Gary, he was made chairman, a role he had until his death. With everything in place, it was time to build up the company, the country, and the industry. But U.S. Steel's climb to the top wasn't going to be easy. In fact, trouble started right away. So, it's time to learn how history works as we take apart the 100-year decline of America's most important company. This week's video is sponsored by Trade Coffee. Trade has become my go-to source for providing me with that perfect cup of joe in the morning. Trade Coffee makes coffee fun and exciting, connecting me with over 450 coffees from over 55 local roasters including dark roasts, espressos, blends, and rare roasts. Their team of coffee experts curates the perfect coffee match for you based on your taste preferences and surprises you with a new variety every time. I get excited every time I see this red bag come to my door, because I know it's my Trade Coffee bag, which was roasted within 48 hours of being shipped. But Trade has something new and exciting, and it's perfect for the summer. They've curated the best selection of iced and cold brew coffees into a cold coffee subscription so you can stay cool this summer and stay caffeinated all year long. I love making Trade Coffee at home, but for days when I don't have time, they also have great on-the-go options. I tried out the Joe Coffee Honey Oat Latte and the Parlor Cold Brew, and they were both refreshing, and I can't wait to get them again. Give Trade a try this summer. Right now, they're offering 30% off your first subscription order when you visit drinktrade.com/howhistoryworks to try it out yourself. You'll save on your coffee this summer, and they guarantee that you'll love your first coffee or they'll replace it for free. That's drinktrade.com/howhistoryworks. If you asked the board of executives at US Steel, they would have said that 1902 was a runaway success. By the end of the company's first operating year, they were producing 67% of all steel. By comparison, Coca-Cola's US market share for non-alcoholic beverages over the last 15 years averages out at 45%. For a drink you can get anywhere in the world, from a 5-star hotel in China to a humble beach vendor in Brazil, it still got nothing on US Steel's dominance. They'd made such a splash that Wall Street came to know US Steel as simply the corporation. The ominous moniker fits the company perfectly. Instead of being infamous for its efficiency or creativity, it was distinguished by its enormous size. The Wall Street Journal wrote about its uneasiness over the magnitude of the affair. Never before had the world seen an integrated company this gigantic. Such a beast may not seem that original in our age, but for the time, this capitalistic Frankenstein's monster divided opinion. All the buzz must have made the executives feel like monopolization was a shoo-in. Competitors knew it was just a matter of time until they were bought out or crushed, but at least they had a head start to escape. That's because the creation of US Steel had its own problems. For starters, the formation had caused a lot of debt. Like, a lot of debt. Carnegie demanded that he be paid out in gold bonds. He'd encountered some financial turbulence before the merger and likely wanted to guarantee a risk-free retirement. He'd previously told Schwab how Carnegie Steel would have cut prices to maintain market share. Seeing as Carnegie Steel was, at the time, the go-to low-cost steel manufacturer, his threat to undercut others was credible. Carnegie had also been gearing up with a price war when he was a direct competitor with JP Morgan's own steel companies. Having a desperate or angry Carnegie in the mix wasn't good for business. If gold bonds were what Carnegie wanted, then gold bonds were what Carnegie got. This meant that out of the gate, US Steel had created a debt obligation to one of its founders for his initial 47% stake plus interest. But this pressure was only the start of their problems. Competitors were nimbler. Their small size meant they could innovate faster. Seeing as how the Industrial Revolution was still in full swing, new tech was coming thick and fast. One competitor that could outdo them was none other than Bethlehem Steel. It had a reputation for its feats of engineering. It had a long track record of producing state-of-the-art armor plating and boats for the US Navy. What they lacked in size, they made up for in adaptability. If US Steel was a Goliath of the industry, then Bethlehem Steel was David. But Charles Schwab anticipated that this shape-shifting innovator would try to pull the rug out from under US Steel. So, he bought them. Ownership transferred to the US Steel Corporation, and this tactic of swallowing up bigger and better competitors became the corporation's playbook. However, they had to be careful with how they used it. Theodore Roosevelt had become president in 1901, the same year that the company was formed. In the run-up to the 1904 election, Roosevelt's campaign relied heavily on his trust-busting brand. US Steel was raising suspicion, so they couldn't grow too aggressively without provoking an investigation. This meant the company's success was slowed down by, well, its success. Yet things only got worse from here. In 1903, Charles Schwab had a falling out with JP Morgan and Albert Gary. He gave up his presidential position, left the company, and bought back Bethlehem Steel. Now, US Steel's most formidable opponent was back in the game, and the guy running it, the same guy who knew their company inside and out. Over the next few years, the market expanded, their market share fell, and the government got closer. But Albert Gary had a plan to keep things running smoothly. a plan so radical that you'd have to be crazy or a genius to implement it. The plan was called Public Opinion. From 1901 to 1911, U.S. Steel and its subsidiaries grew steadily but cautiously. To keep costs down, they took advantage of black codes and discriminatory practices. That way, they could hire black labor at cheaper prices. They even had an agreement with counties in Alabama to use their prisoners as workers. A system of convict leasing was used to force prisoners into mines to gather ore and metal. By cutting costs, they were able to buy their largest competitor in 1907, the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company. But all this did was force the government's hand. In 1911, Washington finally broke up Standard Oil, the very company that had been set up by John D. Rockefeller back in 1882. If they went down, then surely U.S. Steel was next on the chopping block. That's why Gary leveraged public opinion. He knew Roosevelt would protect his image of being a trustbuster no matter what. So, instead of running from Roosevelt's crusade, he took the president head-on to cut a life-saving deal. In the winter of 1904, Gary offered to open U.S. Steel's books. In exchange, Gary argued, should the Bureau find any wrongdoing, then the corporation would be warned privately. Plus, they'd be given a chance to set things right. Such a gentleman's agreement would save Roosevelt a lot of time and energy. Most importantly, though, this play appealed to Roosevelt's interests. Firstly, in accommodating the modern industrial order. Secondly, in maintaining his public image. Roosevelt agreed. It's big brain moves like this which earned Gary the reputation of one of the dozen best-known businessmen in the nation. Other big brain plays include throwing his Gary dinners. He'd wine and dine heads of industry at private events so that he'd be able to leverage backdoor channels to reach agreements about cooperative pricing and marketing. This brought stability to an industry known for its widely fluctuating market, and it helped U.S. Steel set the prices they wanted. However, critics would say it wasn't quite the subtle tools of persuasion his biographers might describe. Gary would pull rank on any chairman or president who fell out of line. Anyone who refused to cooperate was promptly disciplined. Nowadays, schmoozing your manager at a wine bar is a reliable way to get considered for promotion. But back in the early 1900s, this was unconventional and bold. He was even known to U-turn on his disdain for labor organizers. Well, on at least one occasion. In March 1908, his meeting with casualty managers of the operating companies resulted in the Committee on Safety of United States Steel. Though a far cry from current-day health and safety practices, it did help prevent further worker accidents. Plus, it stopped them from being sued. Okay, maybe Gary's U-turn wasn't a complete U-turn, but it showed he understood the power of PR. The point is, Gary had just sweet-talked his way out of a Justice Department lawsuit, kept his executives in check, and found a way to placate disgruntled employees. Unfortunately, a well-oiled machine this size is not easy to manage. Information took a long time to travel to the top of the hierarchy, and the Carnegie executives who had stormed out of Gary dinners went on to create new, more agile companies. U.S. Steel were confident they'd be able to smite these sprouting competitors, but the two world wars meant there was more than enough work to go around. By 1941, U.S. Steel's annual output was around 30 million tons. That's 3 times what it made at its founding. But market share had fallen to around 35%. The post-World War II steel industry was an absolute juggernaut. It was the foundation of the economy. It had never been a better time to be into metal. Yet, U.S. Steel ended up with a smaller piece of the pie, even if the pie had grown. In their defense, the market had expanded so much that diluted market share was an inevitable outcome of success. By 1945, America was making up 60% of the world's steel, thanks to innovations in technology pioneered by early days of U.S. Steel. In fact, they were outpacing their biggest rival, Bethlehem Steel, with double the production. Surely, this was enough of a reason for the guys running the machine to kick back and relax? Well, that's exactly what they did. For example, steel's price rose 7% every year between 1947 and 1957. The fat cats enjoyed the profits, confident that America still had a huge head start over emerging industries like Japan and Europe. However, good times create weak men. The complacency of the 50s meant they underestimated the technological innovations happening overseas. Take the Bessemer converter. It helped put Carnegie on the map, yet it was much more difficult to control than the brand new basic oxygen furnace. During this time, Europe experimented with the BOF while Japan adopted it quickly. Unfortunately, American counterparts were far too slow to integrate it. It would be like if a company like Microsoft stuck with the floppy disk even when foreign companies were getting into CD-ROMs. Even if US Steel wasn't overconfident, what could they do? Their network was too big to update quickly or cheaply. Even when they finally got into basic oxygen furnaces, other companies and countries had been spending the interim time closing the market gap. When a BOF was finally built in the US, it produced 17% of steel for the country. By contrast, the BOFs in Japan were creating 55% of steel. That'd be like if Microsoft finally added a disk drive, only to realize smaller rivals had beaten them to Wi-Fi, USBs, and Steam accounts. When the 1970s rolled around, US Steel's steady coasting was turning into a rapid descent. During the mid-70s, Japan's Nippon Steel had an average blast furnace size 4 times that at US Steel. By 1977, more than half of Japan's blast furnaces had a volume of more than 2,000 cubic meters. If you don't understand metric, just know that's a bang for your buck. Yet in America, only 2.6% of the furnaces could match that cubic size. And that was in the whole country. For so long, US Steel had seemed like an unconquerable mountain, always looming and forever out of reach. But as history shows, everything goes very slowly until everything happens all at once. In the blink of an eye, US Steel was eclipsed by the bigger and better Nippon Steel. In a humiliating twist of irony, US Steel had to turn to Japan for help with a blast furnace because their Asian rivals had more experience. That'd be like if Bill Gates had to call Steve Jobs to help him reboot his personal laptop. Oh, and the place that had the broken furnace? That was in Gary Works. Once it was the largest steel mill in the world. Now it's just the largest steel mill in America. Overnight, US Steel's image went from the star of the industry to a washed-up has-been. After decades of leadership and fending off foreign price matching, US Steel realized it could no longer maintain its competitive edge. Edwin Gott was chairman of US Steel when he predicted that, in 1970, worldwide demand for steel would rise by 25%. In the end, the opposite was true. Demand flatlined. Countries that had previously imported American steel had become developed enough to decrease imports or were using new tech to manufacture their own. Or perhaps they got better steel from better companies who used better equipment. Throughout the early 1980s, US Steel's market share fell to 20%. US Steel had officially become one of the least profitable steelmakers in America. By 1985, 150 facilities were cut. By 1995, jobs had been cut from 171,000 to less than 2,100. But it's worth noting that it was an industry-wide problem. Other companies were having to tighten the purse strings too. Foreign competition was battering the American steel business. Everyone was on the ropes. Thankfully for US Steel, streamlining the business made them enormously productive. This leaner, scrappier company managed to fend off competition and increase its exports significantly. As for their competitors, they failed to stay in the game. Between 1997 and 2001, 30 steel companies went bust. That's an average of half a company going bankrupt every month. One of the steelmakers to go under was longtime rival Bethlehem Steel. But critics will say US Steel's adaptation is too little too late. They still lag behind non-American competitors. They didn't even adopt a mini-mill until 2020. For those not in the metal biz, a mini-mill is to steelworkers what high-speed broadband is to the dot-com companies. The point is, if mini-mills are so great, then US Steel's slow adoption of one is proof they haven't really learned anything. They're as slow as ever. However, they might be getting another second chance. At the end of 2023, Nippon Steel announced a deal to acquire the former giant. If the shareholders approve and the regulators give the green light, the $14 billion buyout would mean US Steel would still retain its name and Pittsburgh headquarters. This begs the question. Would US Steel stay American or become Japanese? Maybe it's not the time to ask. But if the Biden administration successfully opposes the deal, we'll never see how the Japanese updates the former industry giant for the modern world. US Steel may have been too big to fail at the start, but now it might seem too nostalgic to die. But maybe you think it's time this relic of the past was put out of its misery. Or maybe you think it's about time America's steelworkers were revived. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this video, be sure to watch our video on how China actually became the country with the largest number of billionaires, to keep on learning how history works.